Okay. Anybody have the Twitch pulled up to be able to tell if it's working? No worries. Good. Great. So here we are. That's fine. Here we are. Here we are playing ESO again. Did you actually play this morning in your video, or did you just talk about stuff? Okay. So, ooh, all right. Yes, we definitely are going to talk about antiquities. So, what I'm doing right now is I'm just going to go to is it Western Skyrim? That's the new one? Shoot, I don't even remember. Yes, it is. Okay. So I'm going to go to Solitude because that is where the professional archaeological organization in the game is located. So, what I'm mostly going to talk about in this presentation is not only how Elder Scrolls Online represents archaeology in the game, but also how they represent archaeologists in the game. Um, so I'm particularly interested in that. And so where I'm going now is to talk to the Antiquarian Circle, which is the professional organization, if you will, in the game. So they're all, um, I don't know that I would say necessarily they're all professional archaeologists, but it's about the equivalent of what you would get in a game like this. Um, so we're going to go talk to them and just sort of figure out their backgrounds because they talk about that a little bit, as well as I'm going the wrong way. Um, I think I'm going the wrong way. Shoot, because they talk about that a little bit. That's where I want to go. As well as just sort of how diverse they are and the kinds of things that they have to say. So that's what I'm going to focus on first. So we're in Solitude, for those of you that played Skyrim. It's pretty similar, but this game takes place, I want to say, several centuries earlier than the story in Skyrim. So it's a little bit different, the world, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty similar. So this is where the Antiquarian Circle lives, and I have some language issues with the fact that it's called the Antiquarian Circle, but that's maybe just me. So this is
Not
very,
just you.
it's not just me. Well, good. uh, I wish I thought it was already. I think they did it because that's just how people talk about archaeology. Uh, yeah, that's okay. I'll let you take it, Tyranny. Um, so Verita is sort of in charge of the Antiquarian Circle, and something I think is particularly interesting and noteworthy about the Antiquarian Circle, but also the other sort of collecting agency in the game, which is called Cyrodiilic Collections, is that they're both headed by Imperials. Um, so if you know anything about real world archaeology, that's not surprising at all. Um, and so the Imperials, right, like in literally their name is that they basically are colonial and like to conquer stuff. So, in the spirit of colonialism, they're also the ones that seem to be really obsessed with collecting other people's stuff. So I think that that's pretty real world, honestly, to have the Imperials sort of spearheading these sort of archaeology and collecting efforts. So we'll talk to her first. She's an Imperial. Um, so I've already talked with these people and done this storyline at some point. So this isn't the initial dialogue that you get, um, but some of the things that they say sort of reflect their background a little bit. So let's see. Um, when we ask about the kinds of things you'll find, in the world, the antiquities, if you will. So whenever I say antiquities right here in the game, it's artifacts. That's what we're talking about. So the lack of me using the word artifact, I don't want that to confuse people, because the game calls them antiquities. So this is basically answering the question of what do you actually do with the antiquities that you discover in the game? Um, and I think this is really interesting because, in the quote unquote real world, we like to talk about how, well, I should say, we archaeologists, various parties, like to talk about how, archaeology discovers or excavates or presents things in a way that is educational to the general public, right? We use them to learn about the past. They go in museums, we do research on them, etc. Um, you will note here that she is saying that you can do only certain things with the things that you find in the game. You can display them in your house, you can tattoo yourself, or you can wear jewelry or armor. So this is kind of funny because in the game, you don't get to put the antiquities you find in a museum or anything. You have two options. Your options are to display them in your home in the game or to sell them. And I think that says a lot about how the game is presenting archaeology. You're not using what you find for educational purposes. You're literally looting stuff so that you can either sell it or be a private collector. So those are the only things that you do with what you find in the game. Um, so that's kind of interesting. I'm clicking through this because she's not actually saying a lot about what you find, or about herself, I guess I should say. So she's a private collector, in case that was up to any doubt. So then over here we have another Imperial. And so if you ask how he got into the antiquity hunting business, it's all he ever wanted to do. So he's a white dude, right? He's an older white dude. I'm just speaking very candidly about how these people are, you know, set up in terms of representation. So he's an old white dude Imperial. All he ever wanted to do was be an antiquarian. He loves cataloging, reading, labeling, very like standard museum work. Um, so he doesn't like field work. He wants to catalog stuff. He is an associate professor at a university. So pretty classic sort of archaeological representation, about like, oh yeah, well, I like to do the behind the scenes stuff, and I'm an academic. Um, and there's something else I feel that he says that's really, yes, this is what I was looking for. You should let the evidence drive your conclusions, not the other way around. The aim of a true scholar is cold, dispassionate, objective study. And if that's not old white dude archaeology, I don't know what is. So that makes me laugh a little bit, but it's also just like sort of the standard way that people think about academics, I think, is that they're cold, dispassionate, and objective. And I think that's starting to shift a little bit, but I think it's really interesting that they have that particular stereotype in the game. So he's one of the members of the Antiquarian Circle. So then if we find a different one, here we have an orc who's also in the Antiquarian Circle, and Bill just had a whole thing about orcs in the session before this. So Elder Scrolls obviously has them too, and he's a warrior. If you see here, it says bring another warrior on board. He's a brawling scholar, which I think is a really fabulous phrase. I feel like more of us should be brawling scholars. So
That's what I aspire to be.
yeah, it's really fabulous. So I'm gonna just sort of quickly go through the things that he says about himself too. So he's a counselor of the orc chiefs, and he's also the professor of tomb studies, which is kind of an interesting turn of phrase. So he thinks that sort of basically mortuary studies should be treated separately from other field work and archaeology work. So, like he says, plucking arrowheads out of the grass on an ancient battlefield is one thing. Searching a Nord barrow for a dragon priest's slippers is something else. So like mortuary archaeology is different than other archaeology, which I think is a pretty well understood distinction at this point in archaeology in general, but also interesting that they put that split in the game. So we have some archaeologists that focus specifically on mortuary work and others that do different archaeology, basically, is the distinction they're setting up here. Dungeons, tombs, old sewerways, and sunken ships. So greater risks mean greater rewards, I think is a phrase I want to draw particular attention to, because what he's saying is that you get better stuff when you grave rob. That's what this means. Um, so greater risks are associated with mortuary archaeology, but they also have greater rewards. So we're setting up archaeology as grave robbing gets you better antiquities. Um, rewards like gold. I'm not talking about gold, I'm talking about discovery. So you find cooler stuff when you rob graves. Of course, he's not using the phrase grave robbing. He's using the phrase tomb studies. And in archaeology, we don't say grave robbing either. We say it's an excavation or we say it's mortuary archaeology or something like this, right? So the same sort of like, well, if we give it a different label, then it doesn't sound so bad. Um, so that's specifically this is some more orc stereotyping. Well, I'm an orc, so I have to be a warrior. But he's also a scholar, so I don't want to spend all of our time on the dialogue here. So I'm kind of going through this pretty quickly. But he likes learning about the past because it's a better way to prepare for the future. So he's not just a warrior orc; he's also a scholar orc. So that's kind of interesting in a general sense, I think. Let's talk to Amalien. She's my favorite. So she's an Altmer or a high elf scholar, and she's also in a wheelchair. So we have our first, other than the uh, the Imperial sort of spearheading this effort, she's the first woman that we see as an actual scholar in this organization, and she's also disabled. Um, so this is our representation of a disabled archaeologist, which is pretty cool because you don't see that super often in games like this. But I think it's important to point out that she's the disabled archaeologist, and she calls herself the organization's resident eccentric. So we're right off the bat sort of lumping our disabled people as the eccentrics in the group. So that's problematic for various reasons. Um, but she also says, if you're fond of bizarre yet completely plausible theory, so she's like, yeah, people think that my ideas are a little bit out there, but they're totally possible. So somebody has to talk about them, right? So I think that's kind of fun. Why do you call yourself an eccentric? It's best to get out in front of the story because everybody else sees me this way anyway. So she's talking about she calls herself eccentric because everybody else just sees her that way. Um, and she likes mysteries. So that's fun. She is interested in the disappearance of various peoples and objects and cultures, which is fun. But because they're mysteries, she's saying that the other members of the organization don't bother. Like they don't think it's worth their time. Um, and I think it's funny the way that she talks about the other members. So like pottery studies are kind of boring and mortuary studies are boring, and she likes the things that require a little bit more speculation. So that's just kind of fun for me. Um, but she has some of the best and most interesting insights into the antiquities that you uncover, which I'll get a little bit more into when we actually go excavate stuff here in a few minutes. Um, so if you ask about her chair, her wheelchair, she made it herself, which is really cool because she says she has a spinal deformity, so she can't walk, and wheelchairs didn't exist, so she just made one. So she's both sort of a theoretical archaeologist and also an inventor, which is pretty cool. And if you keep talking to her about it, she talks about the sort of general disdain for disabled people in Altmer society, which if anybody remembers anything about the Thalmor in Skyrim is not shocking at all. Um, the Altmer are super racist and sexist and ableist and about any kind of ist you can think of. Um, so she's very cool, and we will talk to her more when we actually see the things that we're going to excavate. So let's do that. Let's excavate some things. So
We
this
had a
is,
question from the chat.
yeah.
Um, Going to her ideas about being an eccentric and theories and such.
Mhm.
Um, aren't the Red Guard basically Atlanteans?
Atlanteans. You know, I have to be totally honest that I don't know as much about the Red Guards. Um, oh, why I just came off of my mount just then. Um, so the Red Guards are descended from the Yokudan people, but I don't really know very much about them. So I have to say I'm not really sure about the Atlantis analogy. If anybody else wants to jump in to answer that, if you know more, feel free. But unfortunately, I'm not super able to answer that specific question. So what do I want to do here with the antiquities? Where do we need to go? So there's a whole separate system that they developed in the game for antiquities. And so these are some of the examples of things that you can find um, in the game. So since I'm already in Western Skyrim, I'm going to stay here to find some more of these antiquities. So what I'm going to try to get is this blue one here. So they're color coded by difficulty. So green is the easiest to find, and it goes blue, purple, and then gold. So I want to find this blue one, but you you have to find a lead in order to know where to look for a particular antiquity. So that's kind of like real world scholarly archaeology, right? In that you have to, based on either previous research or archives or other documentation, you have to have some idea where you need to look for things. You don't just find them willy nilly, although, you know, sometimes you just see things that are surface finds. But in terms of an actual site or a particular artifact, you actually do have to have that background information before you go find stuff. So you have to do the same thing in the game. So I'm going to use a lead I already found for this pendant. Um, and I'm going to scry for it. So what that means in the game is basically you have to do a puzzle um, where you use your magic to narrow down the areas where you need to look to find something. So it's kind of obnoxious and complicated, but they mean well, I suppose. So we're going to do the puzzle here to figure out what we need to look for. And so what you have to do is you have to basically reach all of these 6 points, and then it'll figure out where you should look. So the less sort of points that you connect to, it will give you more than one location that the antiquity might be. So like if you don't solve the entire puzzle, you have more places that you have to look, but I've done this a million times at this point, so I'm really good at matching them all up and narrowing that down. So we need to go down here to find what we're looking for, which means I need to go south on the map. Do we have any additional questions yet or not right now?
Not right now.
Okay. All right, so it's going to be just a second for me to actually get to this dig site, if you will, and they do call them dig sites in the game. Um, so you can see the little eye icon on my map bar at the top up there of the screen, which is telling me where I should be going. Um, there's trolls around here, but I'm going to try not to get in any fights just for the sake of timing and distraction and things like that. Um, so what happens when you excavate an antiquity is that you will send it to the Antiquarian Circle for study, and then they will basically send you a report on what you have. And so now you can see my map bar at the top lit up blue. So I'm in the right area for where I need to excavate, but I still have to find it. So I'm using this handy little skill to point me in the right direction so that I know where to look. So now I have to actually find the dig site, which is right here, glowing blue and perfect and beautiful, which is nothing like real life, but it's nice to have in the game. So then here we have our actual dig site. So this is set up not extremely unlike you would in real life, although, you know, there's only so much you can do in the game. So I'm going to use my little tool here to figure out which part of the dig site I should look in. And so it will use these colors to narrow down the area that I should check. And it's green, so it's somewhere over here. So now I'm going to use my hand brush. So you have your hand brush, your trowel, and your shovel to excavate different amounts of dirt, basically. And so I'm focusing on this spot over here that's green because I think that's probably where it is. And here it is. So I get to the bottom, I've found it, and I still have time left. So it lets you basically dig for additional stuff um, that then counts as bonus loot, and it is called loot. Um, so I'm just killing the rest of my time trying to find that. And I just found gold. Oh no, I did find. That is effectively what they're arguing here, right? So I found this
You're
pendant.
billing the client extra hours. Think of it that way.
My bonus loot I got here is gold and some sort of creepy straw doll, which is weird. But you don't do anything with the bonus loot other than sell it. So I also got a new lead. So this is the blue one I was talking about. So now I'll be able to look for that because I have the lead for it. And so now what's going to happen is I'm going to look for that. So I don't get any feedback from the Antiquarian Circle for that specific antiquity because I've already found it. So it says 3 out of 3 here. So I could find it 3 times. And I got feedback from a different member of the Antiquarian Circle each time. So it sends it to the guild. So the first thing Gabrielle says, it's handsome. I think this is what it's made of. This is how people made them. And this is what I think is specific to this particular item. So it's effectively an archaeological analysis of this particular material. So you get it from one member of the guild, and then each time you find it until you max out. So this particular item had 3 different analyses. So you can get it from different members of the guild. And so sometimes their opinions on these antiquities match, and sometimes they don't match. So that is pretty representative, right, of real world archaeology. Often people disagree about what things actually were used for or how they were made, and those kinds of things. So that's also true in the game. So in this particular example, Gabrielle and Ugron are disagreeing about the purpose of this object, and then Reginus comes in. Reginus, I don't know how you pronounce things in Latin. Um, disagrees with both of them. So that's sort of interesting in that, like for this particular one, none of them agree on the purpose of the object. So it's like pretty representative of how we talk about these things in real life, I would say. So we have a woman scholar here, an orc scholar who is male, and then another imperial um, male scholar. So about 30% representation for this particular item. Um, so now I'm going to look for the one that I mentioned wanting to find, this blue one. And then once I find it, we'll get a new analysis from a different guild member.
So we have a question. Um, are there any artifacts in the game that are treated with a higher level of controversy in terms of origin, purpose, etc.?
Oh, sure. Well, we can just check our codex right now that has, I gotta figure out where it is actually here. Um, so there are some, for example, I'm trying to remember. So you can find these antiquities in every zone of the game, right? And each one is sort of specific to that region. So there'll be like this particular piece here um, is specific to the Argonians, and so the way that they talk about some of this stuff um, basically depends on who made it or who they think made it and where it's from. So this example that I picked here is from Rothgar, which is the Orc territory. Um, and so our Imperial guy scholar says, well, the first orcs probably made this, so let's ask our orc colleague. I'm sure he knows about it. And so he says here, well, I'm not really sure that you're right. So this is not our orc colleague, I should say, yet. So this is our other scholar jumping in first and saying, well, I'm not really sure this is orcish. The size and weight, um, it it seems wrong somehow for what you're saying it is. So then we have our orcs jump in and say, actually, I think it's red card. And so this is just the first example that I thought we could sort of explore that with. But yes, they do argue about origin and where it's from and what it means. And so this is the non-orc scholars looking at what they think is an orcish artifact and being like, well, I think it's this, but maybe we're not sure. And then the orc scholar does jump in and say, it's not what you guys thought it was. It's actually this other thing that's from a totally different culture and group of people. So um, I hope that example sort of helps. But yes, there are lots of disagreements between them about these antiquities. So I'm going to jump back over here and start scrying for. Well, why isn't it letting me? Oh, because there's only one. Well, shoot. Let's try to find this over here. So I need to jump over to this way shrine again. It's a really long way to run across the map to most of these places. Um, so I'm using fast travel points to sort of cut down the time. Honestly, like half of the time I spend antiquity hunting in the game is just running across the map from one spot to the next. So we can do a lot of just chatting or question asking and things while I'm moving from place to place. So the reason I was sort of inspired to work on the representation of the archaeologists themselves in the game rather than just the archaeology is some of the recent work by Laura Heath Stout on representation in archaeological publications specifically. So she just had a really great paper come out this month in American Antiquity about sort of addressing representation and sort of the lack of representation of archaeologists in publications from an intersectional perspective. So if any of you that are listening or involved otherwise in the con are interested in that sort of thing, that paper is really excellent. And effectively, what she finds, and not just her, and not just in this paper, but in the work on this that's been happening recently, it's overwhelmingly clear that despite the fact that the field of archaeology in the US specifically is becoming slowly more diverse, both in terms of gender and race and background and all the other things that we can talk about. Um, publications in high-profile archaeology journals are still overwhelmingly by white men. Um, so the fact that the field is becoming more diverse is not actually changing who is publishing on these kinds of things. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could see whether that's also true the way that games talk about archaeology? So I'm looking into that specifically for this game, um, but you could certainly do the same kind of work in lots of other games, just as a little bit of background on this project. So now what I'm doing is just trying to find this additional material. Did we find it all? Yeah, nice. So there we go. We found it. So we also found gold in and an autographed calling card. Some of the like things that they come up with bonus loot are pretty hilarious. But so now they're sending it to the guild to look at, and now we're going to see what they say. So this is from Verita, who's our imperial woman, sort of leader of the guild. So this is a dragon horn item. It's a drinking horn, but it's made of dragon horn. So she's saying, right, it's too fancy, like it's too difficult to acquire to be just a regular drinking horn. Um, oh, this is fun. This is a fun one. So this is so fancy that it must have been a funerary object commissioned for a jarl's burial. So something else that I'm really interested in for this game is how much the developers are equating archaeology as a field with grave robbing. And so actually, I was getting ready to say before we got this summary is that I've been very impressed so far with the fact that the vast majority of the antiquities that you find in the game are not associated with cemeteries or burials whatsoever. So they actually do a really good job of not making archaeology all about grave robbing. However, this particular piece, if it's a funerary object, is definitely something that you would say is grave robbing. So that's kind of interesting. One of the other examples of something like this that I've found in the game is one of the antiquities is literally a sarcophagus. So that's also pretty yikes. But in the grand scheme of things, they do a good job of not making the archaeology process of the game specific to cemeteries, which I think is sometimes a public misconception of what archaeologists do, that it's mostly grave robbing, or excavating tombs and cemeteries and things like that. So they're pretty good about that. Let's go back up here, and I'll just figure out where else we would like to go antiquity hunting. How's our time doing? Oh, it's only 12:30. Cool. Um, I would also like to say if there's anything specific people would like me to look for or zones that people want me to check out in the chat, say that, and we can focus on that too. I'm just running back to one of these fast travel points here so that I can go somewhere else. I was going to say elsewhere, but that's funny because it's actually a place in the game. Well, now that I've said that, let's go to elsewhere. Do we want to go to northern or southern elsewhere? Let's go south. My load screens have been a little bit long lately, so apologies. Okay. Ooh, it's stormy. That's kind of fun. So we are in southern Elsewhere, which is a Khajiit territory. And so I'm going to see whether there's anything we can find in this area. Okay, so we're looking for a scale breaker bolt, which is kind of fun because it points back to the fact that Khajiit have had to deal with dragons for a long time. So it's not just Skyrim, right, where dragons exist. It's the whole world. Um, and in fact, there's a very prominent storyline in ESO that is about the Khajiit having to deal with dragons. So I'm kind of zigzagging through this zone right now because it's full of enemies and I don't really want to fight anybody. Ooh, I don't need to get that chest. Easy distraction.
So we have some questions.
Hmm.
First question, someone wants to know, is Black Marsh fleshed out in this game?
Ooh, yeah. So there are a couple of Argonian, if you will, zones in the game. So I'll just pull that up really quick so I can show that. Shadowfen is part of Black Marsh, so it's a nice big zone. Uh, what else we got here? I'm looking for Murkmire was a big DLC zone that they added that is also part of Black Marsh. And I want to say there's another one. Is it Stone Falls? No, that's Dark Elf. So yes, there are a couple of Argonian and Black Marsh specific zones in the game. And they're pretty cool. So I can definitely also go to one of those after I finish this example. I love the different kinds of architecture in this game, just as a side note. Like, look at that very cool temple. Very fun. Okay. So I will definitely check out maybe Murkmire after we're done here. Um,
We also had a question asking, do you
mhm.
need special permission to excavate anywhere, or is it a free for all?
Ooh. So you don't need permission per se, but you do need leads. And so in some cases, you have to get your lead from NPCs. So in a sense, you could view that as permission. You don't, I would not say, get permission from like a culture itself to do any excavations in the game. So I guess it sort of depends on how you define permission. In the grand scheme of things, I would say no, you don't really need permission, which is also a pretty standard archaeology thing. Uh, Unfortunately standard, but still standard. So I'm just killing time here. Okay, so we got our bolt, we got a new lead, um, and we got a couple of bonus loot items. So if I go to my inventory here, just as a side note, like all of this, I wonder if there's a separate. Okay, so all of these things here in my inventory these are all antiquities that I've found. So they're just items for sale. These are all things. These are also things that I've found as antiquities. Um, and I'm just showing that to bring back up the fact that the only thing you do with the objects you find in the game is sell them. So it's portraying archaeological material just as a commodity, basically, right, and not as educational tools, which is different than a lot of archaeologists would like it to be represented in real life. So I think that's particularly interesting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to this fast travel point so that we can check out one of the black marsh zones, since somebody expressed interest in that. So I didn't actually find a new antiquity just now, so we didn't get any new analyses from the guild, in case you were wondering. But I'll see if we can find a new one in Markmire. well, we're fast traveling. So I was talking about the way that men versus women write about archaeology, and how I'm looking at that in the game. So I'm using those artifact assessments to do this, and it seems, for the most part. So how I do this is if I go to the codex for um, antiquities, if I look at the codex for each one, right, I can see who wrote it and what they have to say about it. And so I'm using that information to figure out who is writing and what they're writing about. And so far, the split between men and women in their assessments is pretty good. I haven't done too much analysis of how men versus women write about things yet, but the representation itself is pretty good, which means it's better than it is in the real world, is what I mean when I say that. So that's sort of interesting objectively.
It would be interesting to take those writings that are in-game coded male or female, um, and then actually run them through some text analysis,
Hmm.
to see they are whether they seem like they're actually being written by men or women.
I love it. That's a great idea.
If
Is
you
what
build your model, it can be good.
uh-huh.
I'm not going to say it's always going to be accurate, but if you do your text analysis and you base it on good enough libraries and samples, yeah, you can get something where you can feel confident in your response. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. So I am looking for um, a new artifact or antiquity, sorry, that I have not found yet now. And so this is one of the very cool Argonian temples, by the way, or I should maybe ancestral Argonian temples. Um, so it's very sort of Central and South American in the way that their architecture is designed, which is pretty interesting. Um, with the glyphs and things and the way that they're carved. So this is pretty true of all of the Argonian and Black Marsh related zones. So there a lot of the archaeological stuff that you do in the quest lines for these zones, which yes, there are quest lines that focus on sort of archaeological stuff and collecting and museums and that sort of thing. I would play through one, but I've already done them all, so apologies to my friends. Um, that's why we're antiquity hunting instead of doing the actual archaeology storylines. But if you're interested in those, they are really fascinating. Um, and so they do focus on these buildings. Oh no. Oh no. Please excuse me. We're gonna fight real quick. And maybe die? Very possible. Jeez. Oh geez. This is bad news. Okay, we didn't die. Good job, everybody. Uh whoops. So anyway, I totally did. I ran through it and wasn't even paying attention. So anyway, I was just going to say that a lot of those sort of archaeology-based quest lines in the Argonian zones are focused on these old temples, basically because they're ruins, right? And so there's obviously cool archaeology stuff in there because they're ruins. Um, but the antiquity system itself does not focus as much on those areas, so that's kind of cool that they don't just address ruins as archaeological sites, but sort of the fact that you can find archaeological material anywhere you look, um, which is pretty cool and mostly realistic. So here's our dig site here, and pardon my just random clicking, but that's honestly the best way to find stuff in this game.
We had questions.
Hmm.
Um, Does the Central South American culture extend to more than just architecture?
Ooh, I would say not really. I'll see if I can go find any of the Argonian people when I go back to find a fast travel point. Like the way that they dress is not super typical of the way that I guess you could say pre-contact indigenous people in Central and South America tend to be portrayed. Um, but they do wear a lot of like feathers and leather and things like that. So, um, yeah, I guess I would say not in my experience, but I'm also not an expert on those cultures, so take that with a grain of salt. Okay, okay, we got things. Let's see what they have to say about this stone slab. So this is a grave slab in the Argonian lore that I just excavated. Uh, so yes, they're called grave stakes, and it basically has sort of a summary of that person's life written on it. So it's effectively a headstone. Um, although I don't think that they are associated with actual graves. I think that it's just sort of a memorial. So I'll have to double check on that. But so it is also interesting, I think. Sometimes the assessment that you get from the Antiquarian Circle doesn't actually tell you anything about that specific artifact. It's just sort of like a background on what those things are and what purpose they serve. So that's what this particular assessment is. It's them just saying, "Oh, this is what these things do or how they function." In the world, and doesn't address this particular example of that type of artifact. So it's a memorial stake, is basically what he's saying here. Like, yes, I knew that when I excavated it, right? I want you to tell me about this particular one. Um, so anyway, so we found that, and now it has given us a lead for a more complicated artifact. So we're going to look for that one too. And you'll notice here that now this puzzle is much more complicated. So as you sort of scale up in difficulty with the artifacts or the antiquities that you find, they actually do become more difficult to locate within the world. So I think that's kind of cool personally, but it's, I don't know, also maybe a little bit annoying depending on who you ask. Ah, I missed the last one. See, rookie mistake. I wasn't paying enough attention because I've been talking. So now it gives me, this is actually a good example, I suppose. Gives me two places to look for it rather than just the one, like it does when you hit all of the points in the puzzle. So now I have to go look in this spot, but if I don't find it, it's because it's in the other one. So that's a little bit fun, actually, I think, but it does make the process more time consuming in the game. So we're going to go look in the first spot. So if we have any more questions, now would also be a good time for that. Yes. So this does also happen in the game, and we can we can compare this to real life for a second if you want. There's sort of, you can sort of race other people to find an antiquity. So when you find a dig site, other people can find it too. So it's not unique to you. Um, and basically, the first person that finds it, like it's like finders keepers, right? So if I'm digging for the same antiquity that somebody else is at the same time, if they find it before I do, it goes away, and I have to go look for it again. Which, yes, is very annoying, but also I guess realistic. um, so mm, yeah, yeah. So the one that the site that I just dug, it just gave me a bonus loot. thing because that's how it tells you that you went to the wrong place. It's like, well, you tried. Here you go. Actually, go to the other spot. So now I'm going back to a fast travel point so that I can get to the southern part of the map and actually find what we were looking for. Yeah, I think it's funny that you used the word sniped. I would have used the word scooped, like in research, but it's the same thing. Oh, I was gonna show a couple examples of the Argonian people. So these are Argonian mercenaries. They're mostly wearing armor. Um, that's either leather or spiky metal and that kind of thing. I'm looking for one of the sort of knowledge keepers because they dress a little bit differently. Let's see here. I don't see anybody. Maybe over here. Um, hmm. So she's just wearing sort of like a more standard robe rather than plated armor. Some of them do wear like I would almost compare it to regalia, like with a lot of feathers and bright colors and things like that. But I don't see anybody like that in this particular area. So apologies for that. But I'm sure if you're interested in how they're represented culturally, I'm sure that Google actually would be a great resource for that. But also all the Elder Scrolls wikis are pretty good about having that kind of stuff as well.
We have a big question,
Ooh, okay.
and one that I'm always excited to hear other people answer this question. You mentioned the commodification of archaeological artifacts in the game. What do
Uh-huh.
you think about ESO as one of many examples in mass media of the commodification of history? Does it contribute to misconceptions about archaeology as a discipline, i.e., archaeology is treasure hunting, or the quote unquote Indiana Jones syndrome?
Ooh. Well, sure, I think it does. In the same way that all of these games that do that. Oh, there's an enemy coming towards me. I'm going to be distracted for a second. Um, yeah, I think oh, it's going away. I think it does definitely contribute to that. I think it does it a little bit better than others, but I don't like to use that as sort of a comparison for thinking that means it's done right. Um,
Yeah,
because just because you're doing better than other people doesn't mean you're doing a good job. So I think
that's very
I
true.
yeah, I think they definitely do contribute to that. And it makes me wonder, I don't know exactly how the developers figured out how they were going to talk about things like this, right? Did they talk to actual archaeologists to figure out how these things should be represented? I don't know, but based on how these things tend to happen, I would guess not. But I don't know any of the developers to have been able to ask.
So
And I think,
typically,
yeah, would you
um,
like to chip in?
yeah, because this is what I did my PhD on. So typically, what you'll have in a situation like this is you'll have consultants who are brought on for specific cultural pieces. So if they know that they want to set something that is specifically Mesoamerican esque, they will bring on consultants to give them pretty much lookbooks
Mm,
and basic thematic schemes, and it's it's a purely one like it's not a one-to-one relationship. You give the stuff, and then your relationship is done with the company.
uh,
Um,
mhm.
in some cases, they employ people repeatedly or more often um, for this, uh, but in most cases, it's not someone who is on staff continually.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, I hope that addresses part of that question there, because I think that's part of the reason that these misconceptions continue to exist and be perpetuated by these kinds of games, right? Is because they don't actually incorporate archaeologists and historians into their work to the extent that probably they should. And like, sure, it's easier to hire a consultant to only work for you for, a week or 2 weeks or whatever, but that means that there are lots of things that get left out. And so that sort of goes back to the point of like, yeah, just because you're doing it better than other people doesn't mean you're doing it right.
Yeah.
So that's a complicated question. But I think the short way to answer it is yes, I think that they are contributing to the basically the continuation of some of these misconceptions in the way that they represent some of these things. I think we're almost out of time already, aren't we?
We are almost coming up on, I'm not sure what time it is there, but 6 o'clock here.
Yes. So I think okay. Well, if anybody has any additional sort of last minute questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll try to answer them before we finish up here.
We had a question, someone saying that they'd be interested to know how much of these consultant lookbooks get thrown out for being quote unquote not marketable enough.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's tough. I don't know how you would even really be able to answer that. But
You really can't, because everybody who could answer that for you is under an NDA and can't talk
yeah,
about it.
yeah, right. But it's a very interesting question to think about. Um, all the things that we don't know about because they aren't able to be discussed, right?
Yeah.
But would be very interesting to us and relevant if we had the opportunity to learn about them. So I think we have a couple more minutes, I suppose. So I'll keep hunting. Oh man. Also, I would like to say if anybody wants to use this opportunity to Sarah talk about the Tamriel Archaeology Guild, I am part of that as well, and we do real life archaeology in the game. Sarah, if you'd like to summarize that at all, I know your presentation was about that this morning, but in case anybody here wasn't able to check into that. Ooh,
I want to join you guys so bad.
it's fun.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't play together. It's really a
Is it
bummer.
on Mac?
Yes.
Then I can play.
Oh, yeah. Yes. PC and Mac can play together. This is embarrassing.
Awesome.
I died at the very end of my stream.
Yes, you did. That is a dramatic way to go out.
Well, thanks everybody that tuned in and asked questions. This has been really fun, and um, you can ask any additional questions in the chat or whatever. I will pop over to the actual Twitch stream to check the chat when I stop streaming here, and check out more of our presentations all weekend. It's going to be really fun. Yay! Thanks for your help, Megan.
Of